Welcome to Biome. This is Alex Zubin, your host, narrator, and for all you know, a cryptid camped out in the deep dark woods of rural New England. I'm thrilled to have you join me for today's interview with Christopher Thomas. Last week's interview with Nissa Harlow, author of the incredible story Find Me Again, was posted in written form, and it's available totally free on Patreon. The link to that is in the show notes, and I encourage you to check it out. In today's interview, Christopher and I chat about the third story of Season 1, The Winnowers. In this story, a couple who has been overheard having an argument is referred to the Winnowers, who have developed a procedure that removes troublesome elements of an individual's personality. In this case, Henry is subject to the winnowing, and Marge, his wife, must decide what parts of him remain. The story is chilling in the way the best speculative fiction can cause a shiver of dread to run down the spine. It gets us to sit back and ask ourselves, is this fair? What would I do in this situation? And just how far from reality is this scenario anyway? If it's been a while, I encourage you to take a few minutes and give The Winnowers another listen. Christopher Thomas lives in eastern Kentucky and has published short fiction in the Los Angeles Review, the Eckleburg Review, Eclectica Magazine, WENSUM, and elsewhere. He has one published novel, Never Sated, Never Sane, from Chromium Press, 2005. And now, on to our interview. Christopher, thank you so much. I'll jump right in with the questions, if that's all right by you.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. So the first question we have for you today, can you tell us a little bit about where this story began? Was it an image? Was it a character? What's the seed of this story? Where did it germinate from?
Absolutely. The entry point for this story was the idea of personalities and how they manifest in us. That was the thing that was really interesting to me when I launched into wanting to write the story. I actually started it in a more literary, realistic format, but because you start bumping up against like medical diagnoses of multiple personality disorder, and it really expands what you need to do in order to make your point. And the idea of moving it into a speculative space kind of eliminated all of that as a concern, and I could really kind of dig into like my thoughts on how personalities come to be developed in each of us and how they sort of manifest from there.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I can see that in the story as they go through the histories and the characters and the personalities, split them apart, put them back together. Do you have sort of like experience with seeing people going through and sort of sorting their personalities out and addressing different areas of their personality yourself?
I wouldn't say it's so much an observed phenomenon as as it is an experienced phenomenon. Like we all know that we behave differently in different circumstances, and most of us, I think, lazily attribute that to us making conscious decisions to not curse in this one location, but to be fine cursing in another location. And while I'm not making any proclamations, like my view of it is that like these are actually different personalities. Like when you walk into your parents' house as a 40-year-old for Christmas and you behave the same way you were when you were 18, like there's something triggering like that original personality in that location or in that space. And I just like that idea as a concept because, well, quite frankly, it provides a lot of fodder for navigation in terms of trying to understand who we are.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different people, whether they have spouses or friends or whatnot. They think either about themselves or about the person near and dear to them to say, man, I really wish I could, not have that part of you maybe. Like, I like all of you except for, maybe two or three things.
Why
But
are
this
you always
story,
that way when you're with your boyfriend or when you're with your girlfriend? Like, because you're not like that at work or
right.
whatever. It's just there's something distinct that I think we recognize. Yeah.
Yeah. But this story also points out that there's something lost when you take those pieces away, right?
There is a totality effect, right? And so that's part of I think the difficulty in us recognizing it in ourselves is we attribute it as just a very minor variation to what we would consider our singular personality.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I question whether that's really how it works, but it's also one of the things you can't. It's hard to diagnose your own brain.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, you get all up in your own thoughts and minds and feelings, and you kind of can spin, and it really helps to have other people to talk to reflect off of, right?
Exactly. Well, and it requires you to use other people to reflect on. Otherwise, you aren't in a community. Like
Yeah.
You aren't living a life in a society. You're a hermit at that point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, on the subject of other people, when you were writing this piece, did you have anyone particular in mind, anyone who you were trying to reach, any kind of audience that you were envisioning reading this kind of story?
No, and typically that's because I have a few kind of personal rules for writing, and one of them is I'm just going to write what interests me, like what interests me deeply. My hope, of course, is that it will resonate with people, or that somebody will, enjoy what I'm saying, or hopefully the way I'm saying it as well. But mostly, what I'm trying to do in stories like this is kind of examine whatever thought seed that I have, and kind of explore that to its natural conclusion. So, yeah, I'm not really trying to target an audience. I'm really trying to explore the idea.
Yeah. So the audience is kind of internal to yourself, and then whoever wants to go along for the ride, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point, though, because although I don't have an audience in mind when I write the story, once it's done, I have to acknowledge that, like, maybe this is for a different audience than I might submit another one of my stories. And so I think there's some self-selection in terms of the outcome, but not in terms of what I'm trying to achieve.
That makes sense. And when you're going through the process of writing the story, this one in particular, was there anything that you were maybe nervous about putting on the page, or a concept that you weren't as comfortable with, that you weren't sure that you were maybe equipped or the right person to be approaching it? And how did you approach that?
I think we talked about that a little bit. So I did not feel equipped to address like multiple personalities and an individual in a literary realistic format because
Hmm.
of all the medical implications, and because it's psychology, and uh, because people do have actual disorders, and so I didn't want to step on that, or make light of it in any way. And so my move to the speculative form was was the reason I chose to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, it seems like a really vivid way that you chose to depict it. I think that many times people think about emotions as sort of these esoteric things that kind of zoom around. I think Disney did an example of where they personified it, or was it Pixar? You kind of take a different approach where you actually visualize it sort of on a screen, and I thought that was a really cool way that you kind of went about it.
Yeah, you mentioned that in your summation of the story, that very much like an MRI scan or something like that. You could imagine 20 years from now with AI, maybe it's 16 months, like, that we're going to have technology that we could have technology, something like this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but, there was actually the other piece of it that you also mentioned in your summation that I did actually question was the gender flip,
Hmm.
in terms of the kind of true victim of the story being male and without voice, and that sort of thing. But I wanted, so that made me nervous initially because I didn't want to put too many themes in the same story.
Yeah,
But at the
yeah.
same time, I liked it doing that because in speculative fiction, if you can have two or three things, I think, that are just off center, it untethers the reader a little bit and allows them to kind of take in what they're reading at face value.
Yeah, it's a purposeful disorientation, right? Like putting them
Exactly
out of
right.
the normal.
Exactly.
That's really wonderful, and I think that's one of the things that makes this story unique. One of the other things that you're kind of alluding to is that as you were writing this story, there were some pieces that might have been easier, some pieces that were more difficult. Was there a scene that you went back to, that you revisited, struggled with?
The opening scene, the opening section, I wrote very quickly, relatively speaking, meaning it kind of fell together pretty quickly. The Then it became, how do I move through the bureaucratic process of accomplishing it? You have to make decisions about, do I show every exam, every procedure, or do I kind of skip ahead? I didn't want to write a 6,000 word story, so you have to make sort of decisions there. So settling on just that final procedure and going into the clinic and seeing that kind of contained the scene, and then the final scene, as short as it is, also came somewhat quickly conceptually, but it took me a fair number of rewritings to get it to have the tone that I wanted.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, tonally speaking, there's definitely, a cool detachment through most of the story, which I think gives it an extra sense of sort of haunting, sort of imposing bureaucratic inevitability, right? And by not showing us all of those scenes of all of the appointments, you kind of almost make it inevitable that we already got here. He didn't really have any say. It all just happened, right?
Yeah, it's a river that's flowing. That's exactly right.
Right. Is there anything in the piece that you kind of tucked in as a detail that maybe isn't so obvious that you think that readers could have missed or might have not considered?
The only thing that comes to mind is just the slight ambiguity of the end. I've had people respond to me in that the tragedy of it all, that the disconnectedness and that, but I've had others respond to me that Marge has been liberated to some extent, and that she's now happy to use this mangled knife to open her herring and those sorts of things. So I do like the idea of the ambiguity of it, partly because maybe what we were talking about earlier with personality is depending on the moment and the setting, like our own opinions about what situation we are in change. And so I think that there's some truth to probably both sides of that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've also heard some of that feedback where people are a little bit unsure how they should feel. And I think it reflects a little bit about where a given listener or reader anchors themselves. Do they anchor themselves with Henry, or do they anchor themselves with Marge, right? Do they feel like they are ending this story on a loss or on a liberation?
Yeah, and I think for the horror of it, of the experience, the other thing I like about the ambiguity is it suggests that there really is no end to the ambiguity. So
Yeah.
that, like, not only this particular couple, but many others are probably living in very similarly disconnected experiences for the same reason.
Absolutely. That makes absolute sense. I would like to move on to kind of a little bit of a flash round where I sort of shoot questions at you, your
Sure,
process, your style, moving away from the story specifically and just more about sort of your overall process. That sound
sure,
good?
absolutely.
All right. So first one, typical writer question: are you a plotter or a pantser?
It depends on the story, a little bit of both. If I'm writing a longer piece, I need to have some structure in mind because I need to know where I need to get to. In a shorter piece, in a shorter story like this one, for example, I would consider this more of a cancer story. Like, so this one was I had an idea and I just need to start with enough character and enough setting to start the idea moving and then kind of see where it goes. So for short pieces, for flash fiction, anything under, I'd say, 3 or 4 thousand words, I'm happy to just kind of jump in. Anything longer than that, I really feel a responsibility to the reader to some extent to put a bit more effort in
Yeah.
and think about it. I also am firmly of the opinion that even if you plot something out pretty well, not too detailed, but if you plot something out with good structure, there's still enormous room for movement and creation and inspiration and all of those things. So I don't think one limits the other in any real way unless you get too far down to the weeds.
Yeah. Okay. Are you somebody who prefers to write longhand, keyboard, or something else? Whiteboard?
I've always typed. I do a lot of note taking just on apps on my phone. So I do a lot of transcription or a
Hmm.
lot of dictation, especially when I'm driving or things like that. But at some point, it all gets put into the computer. I don't really write in longhand because I don't have positions like physical positions that are comfortable for me to
Yeah.
do it long term. I've been using a computer since I was 14,
Yeah.
and it's just honestly, it's too attractive to have the ability to just edit and delete and move stuff around. And yeah,
Absolutely.
and I will say maybe partly because of that, or as a consequence anyway, I tend to edit in place. So like I am editing as I'm writing. Of course, there's a final edit when everything's put together, but I can't get past a paragraph if I don't like that paragraph.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
just a hang up that I have.
I understand that. It's a perfectionist tendency, right? All right. And are you more of a night owl, morning person, or just write whenever inspiration strikes?
I used to be a night owl, but I've been married for 30 years, so that has been taken away to some extent. And I'm freshest in the morning, so I tend to try to get up. If I'm going to be writing that day, I tend to try to get up. And I'm at my computer by 7 or 8, and I'm usually done, or I kind of quit by 11 or noon. Like 3 or 4 hours is about what I think I can get out of a sustained session. I might go back later in the day and like reread some of the stuff that I've written, but I won't make any more attempts at writing. So yeah, early mornings, quiet, maybe a little background music, but just enough to keep me distracted from the world around me.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, that's another flash question: is do you have a way to set the mood, or do you like to write in silence?
For longer pieces, I will actually create playlists.
Okay.
So like, the novel I'm working on now, I've got a playlist of like 200 songs or something like that, and I will let it just kind of, for mood, just kind of set the tone of what I'm trying to do. For shorter pieces or for editing or for anything like that, it's going to be nothing with voice because the lyrics interrupt me. But so classical instrumentation, blues or jazz, anything like that at a really low volume. Again, just to kind of keep my mind focused on what I'm doing so that I don't get distracted by my external environment.
Yeah. And do you share those playlists, or are they very personal and you kind of keep them on the lockdown?
They're private just because I don't think anybody's going to care that much about them. But yeah, it's something that I just do for, again, setting a mood in the back of my mind. I don't really use it for much other than that.
Okay.
And honestly, I haven't done a full project doing that, so I don't know like how successful it actually is.
Yeah.
When I wrote my first novel, the proliferation of like Spotify and iPods and like in playlists just didn't exist. It would have been much more difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, technology has taken off, and now it's easier to do a lot of those things that would have been tedious before, right?
Absolutely.
All right. So a final flash question for you: if you could pick one writer, living or historical, who would it be? If you had an hour with them to just sort of sit and chat, who would it be and why? We finally stumped you.
Well, it's a broad pantheon to choose from, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The best book that I've read in the past 15 years is Milkman by Anna Burns. And I think it's just an amazing accomplishment. I was really captivated by the whole novel the entire time that I read it, completely transported. And she used a structure in that novel, a grammatical structure, a paragraph structure that is very different than anything you'll see in 95% of novels, whereby all of the dialogue is embedded in paragraphs, so it's all very dense. But that's the intent because of the nature of the novel. And so I would love to be able to sit down with her and just talk to her about how she, well, one, to clarify whether or not the things that I see are in fact things that she thought, or if I'm just creating that out of whole thought. But then to just kind of talk about her process and how difficult that was to execute from an ideation perspective all the way through to the end.
That's a wonderful choice, and I think I'm going to look up that title. I haven't read it myself, and I'll put it in the show notes as well so that others can find it too. If you enjoyed this interview, make sure you're subscribed to this podcast. Please also share Biome with your friends. It's fun to talk about stories, what you liked about them, what you didn't, what you might have done differently in the characters' shoes. Next week's interview with Nicholas Packwood will be released as a written exchange exclusively on Patreon. The interview will be available for free, but I hope you consider signing up to support Biome so I can keep sharing amazing stories and interviews with you. But now, dear listener, farewell wherever the days take you.